Peace. Good morning. How you doing? Today is Monday. Make sure I get the date right. Today's the 14th. This is the first day, first week of daylight savings time. So if you felt like you're missing out on some sleep, you're not. You're not missing out on sleep. Why? Because you had Sunday to prep yourself for it. But today is Monday, and for everybody that's here, I definitely appreciate you, and I give you gratitude, and I give you peace and blessings on you, and I assure that your week is going to be a very strong and bountiful week, to where you may be able to reap some harvest that you've been planting for in 2022. So, thank you for being here, and I appreciate everything. Every time that you're here, I appreciate you, and I will always do that. So before we get into it, I want to go ahead and give shout outs and blessings to those that, here in the podcast world. I haven't done it in a while, so I will do it for those that are listening from that area. So everybody in Italy, thank you. India, Germany, Nigeria, Canada, Indonesia, South Korea, Singapore, South Africa, Russia, Australia, Kenya, Puerto Rico, United Kingdom, that's a new one, Morocco, Mexico, New Zealand, Ireland, Turkey, Netherlands, Pakistan, Algeria, Slovenia, Namibia, and Dominican Republic. That's a new one. So for everybody that I've said your country, that means you're listening in that space. So I thank you and I appreciate you. And make sure you share this podcast or in a podcast space. And those who are watching on Facebook, share this live, because today we're going to be talking about the inner voice, the things that you say to yourself when you're in that moment inside of your head. Like, who do you communicate with, and how do you communicate to yourself? So yeah, let me bring this up for people who show up periodically, so they can always see what we're talking about. We're going to be talking about changing the voices inside of your head. So my question to you, good morning, Miss Kelly. For the other three that are watching that didn't say good morning to me, I will say good morning to you again. So what do you say to you? That's a question that we have to answer for ourselves and to ourselves, and sometimes even by ourselves, because we're not always in a good space. We're not always in a healthy space. But what do you say to you when you are in that space is where I want us to gather our thoughts and put ourselves in that mindset of what do you say to you when you're in that space? Because every day is not always going to be a happy day, and everything that you do is not always going to work out in your favor. But what do you say to you? And where are your thoughts when you're in that space? Because when you're in that space, there is a voice that comes from within, an internal voice. But a lot of times we find ourselves in that space, some more often than others. But what conversations are you having with yourself when you're in that spot, when you're in that space? So let's go ahead. I'm gonna bring this up like we always do. We go through the lesson plans and the conversations, and then we'll jump back into it. So let's go through the definition real quick. Go through the definition, and hey, share this, and once you finish sharing, go ahead and put done, however you do it. All right, so going through the definition, we're talking about the inner voice. And those that know the platform, you go through the definition, and then I create a contrast within the definition itself. So the definition of inner voice, there's damn near a definition for everything. So the definition for inner voice is thoughts or feelings that you do not express, but seem to warn, criticize, or advise you. So in contrast, this contrast is white over red, which is thoughts not expressed, but seem to advise you. I think that is a little bit more practical for where we are right now, because I think right now for us in our day and age and in our timeline and where we're living right now, um, those are inner thoughts like warnings and being critical to ourselves and stuff like that. I mean, yeah, it's easy for you to want to notice and to talk about the bad stuff, but what about the great things that happen? Because the inner voice are thoughts not expressed, because it's internally. Thoughts not expressed, but seem to advise you. Whether it is advising you by giving you a warning, or advising you by telling you to sit down, or advising you by telling you to move fast or to move slow. But it is a thought not expressed, again, because it's internal, but yet it seems to advise you. But when we're looking at it, like we're saying, change the inner voice. If you're continuing to hit the same wall by listening to the same voice, then obviously there's something about the voice within. If you understand that, then put something that you have to understand the voice within. A lot of us don't understand the voices that are carried within, because you may be carrying a voice that happened a long time before you was even in your own physical existence. You could be living in a voice that your daddy did, or a voice that your grandpa did, or your grandma did, that voice that carried over through generations, or even skipped a generation but slapped you dead in the face. But you're going to have to understand that those are the thoughts that's not expressed, but yet seem to advise you. And the R2 definition of inner voice is your inner voice is your battleground to a daily war. It's a battleground that you find yourself on. It could be a conflict that you continuously to find yourself at, but it is a daily war. It is something that happens over and over again. These are conversations that you're having with yourself, but the conversations that you're having with yourself, you can win those conversations when you change the verbiage, when you change the conversations that are within inside of your head. And the last thing that I want you to do before we really get into it is this African proverb is, if there is no enemy within, because again, we're talking about inner voice. If there is no enemy within, the enemy outside can do us no harm. But let's personalize this. I want you to say this to you. I want you to look at it from a personal perspective. Because if there is no enemy within, you can type this and you can proclaim it. You can give us your own affirmation, and you can put you into a different voice. Because when you change this voice, it can actually change the dialect and how you can communicate going forward. Because if there is no enemy within, the enemy outside cannot harm me. That's you taking a personal approach. If there is no enemy within, if there's no enemy within, the enemy outside can't harm me, because I've changed the way I think. I've changed my dialect. Don't you know if you change words, you can begin to change the sentence, then you can begin to change the paragraph, then you can begin to change the pages in your life. You can begin to change the chapters in your life, because it goes by what is being said. And let's look at it like this from this perspective too. Let's look at an invoice, like how it played inner voice and invoice. But when I began to study inner voice and something clicked, it's like, okay, invoice and receipt. Even in our natural lives, especially those that are in the business terms or in the business world, and they understand a invoice and they understand a receipt. A invoice is something that I'm telling you that I'm going to do. A invoice has a scope of work of saying, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. What invoices have you written for yourself? What scope of work have you told yourself that you're going to do? Don't you know a receipt isn't given until the invoice is paid? The harvest does not come until the seed is planted, because the harvest is the receipt to the invoice that you said that you're planting this seed. And in the scope of work, you said you're going to water this seed. And in the scope of work, you're saying you're going to till the ground. And in the scope of work, you're saying that you're going to do these things in your life, but because you have not done those things in your life, there will be no receipt. And until the scope of work change, until the scope of the concept of the reality or the words that you're using to talk to yourself about yourself when you're having these conversations internally within yourself won't change until there has been a new way of your saying, a new way of doing things, a new way of saying things. Those are the inner voices that you're having inside of your head. When are you going to change that? When are you going to change it? You can't keep using the same words and expect the language to change. You can't keep saying that tomorrow I'm going to start this, but when tomorrow comes, you're putting tomorrow out there again. Or having the inner voice saying that you're stupid, or having the inner voice saying that you can't do this, or you won't make this, or that will never happen. But until you change the inner voice that is within inside the inner man, then the outer man will always be affected. But until you change the inside, the outside can never do you any harm. Change your inner voice. I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. But no matter what we do have the ability to learn. Because when you stop learning, you cease to dwell and conduct yourself in a civilized manner, because you're not striving to learn from your experiences, and your experiences are not giving you tips and jewels. Because remember, the last time, like we spoke about on Friday, success leaves trails. So therefore, if you have learned from that what you just got finished doing, then it would leave a trail to tell you can do it again. So if you have these inner conversations with yourself, say, you know what, I can do this. This is actually going to happen. Changing the concept of what you're doing can change the execution and the conclusion, but you have to change the inner conversations that you're having with yourself. Change those inner thoughts. Sometimes your inner voice can be the most self-sabotaging conversation that you can ever have in your life. But it started within. That's something you can't blame on nobody else, because that was your inner conversation. That was your inner consciousness. Don't sabotage your blessing by tearing down your conversations inside of yourself. Speak life into yourself. Speak blessings into yourself. Speak love into yourself. Speak beauty about yourself. Encourage yourself even the more. Because if you don't change the language, then you will listen to anything. I'm going to say that again. If you don't change the language, or if you don't change the voice inside of your head, then you will listen to anything. But you have to be the foundation of your faith. You have to be the foundation of the conversation inside of your head. You have to be the foundation of the groundwork that you've taken that have led you into your successful life, because you've changed your inner voice, and it would change your conclusion. Change those voices, and I guarantee you that you will live a different life, because you see it from a different light, and you see it from a different perspective, and everything about you will be new, because you begin to speak to yourself in a new way. And you begin to live your life in the way that you know that the life that you always wanted to live first must live inside of you. Then it will have an outward approach. Because remember, if it said, if there is no enemy within, the enemy outside can do you no harm. But if there is life within, then everything outside of you can live. That's a new one. That's not an African proverb. That's an R2 proverb now. So if there is life within, then everything on the outside of you can live. I want you to say that to you. If there is life within me, then everything on the outside of me can live too. You guys be blessed. And remember to change the voice, change the inner voice within, change the language that you have within inside of your head. And I guarantee you that the steps that you take will be ordered, and the steps that you take will be in line with the direction that you know that you can go into. And y'all be blessed. Peace.